I propose to speak about fairy stories, though I am aware that this is a rash adventure. This is a quote by Tolkien for his paper on fairy stories. He states that he has read and loves fairy stories since childhood, but has never studied them professionally. I have been hardly more than a wandering explorer or trespasser in the land, full of wonder, but not of information. Trespasser is a good word, for in the field of mythology, to wander into the realm of the fairies as a human is to trespass, as is what fairies do when they wander into our world, they trespass. Humans and fairies are seen to live side by side, but to meet can sometimes involve terrible things to happen. This video is not about arguing as to whether fairies are fake or real. It is about beginning to explore the mythologies which have been added to for centuries with regards to the fairy folk. Specifically, I will be looking at a side to fairies in mythology and folklore and legend which is less considered. The stories of dark fairies, evil beings, dangerous to humans, unforgiving in their nature and their practices. Mythology writer Lewis Spence states, practically all supernaturals partake of human traits, more usually unpleasant ones. It can be difficult for humans to openly discuss their failings, both slight and evil. So in our literature, our movies or TV, we represent the darker side of ourselves through the supernatural, through the monsters of the story, the devils, demons, vampires and aliens. Tolkien argues, by us creating stories in literature, man subverts the pureness of fairies to evil. Essentially, we take a being pure in form and transplant our own failings onto the creature. Humans being evil and destructive can be a difficult thing to watch, but put Godzilla into a movie, there goes Tokyo, and we can eat popcorn and choose to ignore what the monster is representing, ourselves. A supernatural being, even a man-made monster, is not human, so responsibility for evil is placed upon what theorists call the other. That is to say, the other, darker sides of our own nature that we generally like to hide away. In the matter of fairies, for the past 200 years or so, they have become more and more friendly, beautiful, good-natured and kind. In the 1800s, with the rise in education, more people, including children, learned to read. Before this, stories were stories for all, young and old. Early versions of what we see as fairy stories were far more sinister and, at times, horrific, but as children's literature became more popular, they become more child-friendly. Fairies were a popular subject that in art and literature and eventually cinema was seen as good. From the artwork of Arthur Rackham to 20th century images such as the flower fairies and Disney-influenced examples such as Tinkerbell, fairies were good, became friends with the fictional characters who came across them, granted wishes and made dreams come true. But before all this happened, the mythology of fairies had a different perspective, depending on the location and the belief systems of the creation stories. One of the most consistent traits of fairies in folklore is that they have a thievish nature. They show no remorse from stealing whatever they want to. They steal from humans, including babies, beautiful maidens and mothers. Researcher Catherine Briggs aligns them with animals, which is another way of removing their sins from human characterization. She compares them to foxes and other wily predators. In a 1673 text called A Pleasant Treatise of Witches, fairies in this are described as little mimic elves, that they purposely imitate humans, but they do this with derision, not respect. Many writers and followers of fairy mythology over many years have sought to separate fairies as being both good and evil. These are called in some areas the Seelie and Unseelie courts. This is part of the Scottish mythologies of the fairy realm. Seelie is an Anglo-Saxon term meaning happy or prosperous. Unseelie, unhappy or wretched. The ranks of the unseelie court are seen to be made up with those who, as some writers will say, have given themselves up to the devil. They can be bad men who died fighting, unmarried mothers stolen during childbirth, or even unbaptized babies. Evil fairies like to inflict harm. They like to stir distressing emotions such as grief. They enjoy the misery of humans. Fairies, especially evil fairies, are tricksters. They can use illusion, including shape-shifting and becoming invisible. Fairies appearing can also be seen as a portent of death. In Scotland, they may be seen washing the shrouds of those about to die. In England, they can appear as a black dog. They can also create phantom funerals, which are followed by the real funeral a few days later. These exist in stories from both England and Wales, with people claiming to have seen such visions. Fairies also have various tricks to play on local mythologies. In Orkney and Shetland, they will place an object on the water for a woman to go in to retrieve, at which point she risks being dragged under. In Wales, the sudden appearance of a thick fog was to mask an attempt to steal cattle or even children. A common feature of the dark side of fairies is their tendency to steal children, especially newborns before they have been touched by human hands. Some mythologies have the fairies hiding their theft by replacing the stolen child with a fairy changeling. It is worth noting that in many mythologies, the stolen child is well looked after and become part of the fairy community. There have been documented cases over the centuries where people have been arrested for killing an infant, and they would claim they had killed the changeling, not the real child. In 1624, James Houston used this as a defence, claiming, and I quote, "the fairy had taken him away." Fairies can also be vengeful, both to humans and between themselves. Vengeance can be in the form of apparitions, or hearing the words, "vengeance is coming." They would destroy crops, steal humans, impose bad luck onto the victim. So fairies like to seek revenge. They are vindictive. They are also immortal and can wait and wait and wait for retaliation. Different legends and word-of-mouth stories have described different types of fairies and the evil acts they can commit. Kelpies in the Highlands of Scotland have been said to steal humans and devour their bodies. One story has a Kelpie transform into an old woman who goes into a girls' shelter. One girl wakes, only to see the woman sucking the blood of her friends. This story is an example of how fairies are sometimes seen as vampires. For example, there is a green fairy woman with a bone beak and cloven hooves. She drinks men's blood and crushes their bones. On the Scottish-English border is the red cap, or bloody cap. It has long teeth and claws. He haunts old ruins and takes the life of anyone who wanders in. The English county of Yorkshire tells tales of supernatural hounds called the Gabriel Ratchets. They are fairy beasts. They are formed by infants who die before baptism. Certain people who die early end up living with the fairies in a form of limbo. Fairies can also take life from not touching the victim or even being near. The female fairy, Loreg, can scare people to death. The Binai can curse the victim, who dies within a year. The fairy touch can also take the life. One hand on the shoulder can doom the recipient to death. The Mythology of Fairies is a large body of work that has built up over the centuries. It is vast, it is complicated, and it varies from region to region, but in a lot of the mythologies there are both good and bad fairies, and this is a subject that I will return to, exploring more some of the darker stories of the fairy folk. The subject matter in this video will be extended for my Fantastique Folio publication, which should be available around the end of October, so more news on that will be coming soon. Thank you for being patient with me and getting a new upload. More fairies will be on their way, and next week we will be looking at the subject of ghosts of the pirate days. Thank you for watching.